At the beginning of last year, I finally got to play some games that I've been meaning to play for years, but never did. Whether I was procrastinating or didn't have the money for it, or even because of my backlog, I wasn't able to get to these games. Last year, the first game that I played, and the game that I am now addicted to, and now have all the books for, was The Witcher 3, which is now, of course, one of my favorite of all time. And this year, I think that franchise that will immerse me is Dark Souls. Dark Souls terrifies me. In my eyes, it was always the hardcore gamer game. You'd have to spend hours upon hours conquering even one boss battle, and really that isn't too far off, but it's a lot more easy to understand and learn than I thought. I picked up Dark Souls a couple months ago because it was on sale, which, according to the fans of the game, does not really happen that much. And I decided to put it on my games list for this year, thinking it would take maybe a couple months and maybe even, like, exhaust me, make me stop playing games. And, well, now I'm just starting Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls really is all they say it is, but it's so much more than that. Dark Souls is difficult, absolutely, but it's also addicting. Its customization is so underrated. Making builds is so surprisingly clear and easy to figure out compared to some other games that I enjoy. And God, the level design I will have to get into. It's exhilarating. Oh, by the way, subscribe. This is a demand. Subscribe. Dark Souls takes place in Lordran, a medieval fantasy kingdom full of beautiful architecture, dungeons, monsters, and people. Most of the things you will encounter are monsters, rats. There are hollows, which are basically humans that have lived so long that they've lost all sense of being, and so many more. There are a lot of creatures in this game. When I started the game, it was incredibly overwhelming. There were so many enemies coming at me at once, I had no idea what to do. I think I spent about my first 5 hours of the game in, like, the second area of the game, the Undead Burg. From what I got online, I wasn't the only one that had this wall. The start to most Souls games seem to feel like they have an unreachable wall you can't get over. One that I'm, again, encountering in Dark Souls 2 as I'm just starting it in the first area of the game. It feels like it's bad game design, and maybe it even is, but the wall that I encountered in the Undead Burg didn't really feel like as much of a chore as it maybe should have. Being in that wall really forced me to figure out how the game works. Like, I literally had no idea what the number at the bottom right was until near the end of that wall. I had no idea you could level up. I kind of just kept buying materials from the little market guy in the Undead Burg until I figured out you could level up with souls. And what a soul was, I had no idea until now. So despite what may have been a negative experience, I feel like it actually made the game almost better. And to add to that, even the tourist demon right after, which put me in another wall, when I beat it, I cried. It was so intense and exhilarating. It was difficult, but it's so fun, which is a theme with most Dark Souls bosses, I'm sure you can imagine. Once you get past the demon, and by extension that wall of difficulty, the game really starts to open up. You'll find yourself in new areas constantly. Every area is incredibly distinct. It almost feels like you're walking through a museum of different historical landmarks. Each area of the game its own exhibit. Forests and castles and ruins go on, and it's honestly breathtaking for a 13-year-old game to have this much diversity. Dark Souls' visual design and level design blend together so effectively that it almost feels like it's an open-ended game, while still in reality being incredibly linear. You can, and you do, explore these beautiful areas, whether it's a hidden corner, a ledge you have to drop off of, up to a beautiful dimension with an endless ocean that you can entirely miss in the game. There's always something new to be found in these areas. But we all know what Dark Souls is most famous for. The combat. And my god, I have absolutely become better at games as a whole because of Dark Souls. It's like taking a class in stamina management. Every weapon has a heft to it you don't normally see in other games. Dark Souls is slow, it's methodical. If you button mash, you screw yourself so easily. I had to unlearn button mashing entirely so that I could get farther in this game. There are daggers, swords, axes, there's bows, there's magic. The amount of options that you have at your disposal is so great. For myself, a little under halfway through the game, I started using the Zweihander, a giant blade with these incredibly slow swinging animations. And that thing kind of ran me through to the end of the game. But don't get me wrong, I did have to experiment even then. Even my Zweihander couldn't be used in every battle. The option for customizing your stats is great. You can use different rings, you can use different clothing with different weight or types of defense. Maybe you're facing a magic-heavy enemy, so you put on some magic-resistant armor. Or you need to dodge faster to get away from the attack, so use a ring that increases your equipment load. Or you just swap for lighter armor that lets you move better. Every item affects the game majorly. I really wish I had a criticism for the combat system, but I don't. Dark Souls has some of the actual best combat I've ever seen in a game. Now, I won't touch on the bosses too long, because I feel like that is the main content that I wouldn't want to spoil for you, but they are also spectacular. Besides maybe one or two, they're almost completely distinct with their own patterns, weaknesses, and even now re-encountering these bosses in New Game Plus really showed me how different you have to treat each boss. You cannot use the same strategy every time. If I did have to criticize one thing about the game, it's that the boss's difficulty is a little varied. There were late game bosses that I could just beat first try, no issue, and others that took me hours of retrying to finally get through. Maybe my build was just set up perfectly in that moment, which led to not a lot of problems being had, but regardless, some kills just felt a little off. Not nearly enough to annoy me, keep in mind, but it did not help the bosses be as memorable as they normally are. Overall, should you play Dark Souls in 2024? Absolutely. I think if you're sick of your normal games, or even just gaming as a whole like I was last year, this is like the cure. Don't go in expecting a story. Don't go in expecting something that you can just mindlessly play while you have YouTube on or whatever. Go in with the expectation that this is what your years of gaming have been preparing you for. It's your gamer exam.